What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the newest episode of the Dragoncast. My name is Brian Daniels, and I'm here with my podcast partner in crime, Victor Salazar. And Victor, we got a very special guest with us here today on this episode of the Dragoncast. We want to welcome the former president and CEO of Sega of America, and he also spent some time at Matchbox and Mattel. He was with Leapfrog for a while, too. I mean, this man had all kinds of stuff to do with our childhood. Right? I want to welcome Mr. Tom Kalinske to the show. Tom, it's great to have you here today, sir.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here with you guys.
Thank you. No, like Brian says, you had a hand in our childhood throughout the early 90s. I mean, it was just amazing. You know, if you guys haven't caught this Console Wars documentary, man, you'll see what Tom was involved with, all kinds of, we're talking about Barbie, Masters of the Universe, you know, the Hot Wheels toys, She-Ra, everything, guys. Flintstone gummy bears. I mean, the Flintstone vitamins. Come on, man. Who did not have those? So this is amazing that we get to chat with Tom. I would love to hear some of this in regards to the time period, man.
Yeah, well, Flintstones, we made it the #1 vitamin in 1968, and I think it still is today.
It is still today. Yeah, man. That's just insane. Yeah, I just want to, first off, I want to say thank you for giving me most of my childhood time. It's so appreciative. I remember when I was a kid, it was Christmas, and I opened up my Sega Genesis. And, one of my favorite games for Sega Genesis was Aladdin. It's my favorite Disney movie.
That was a very good game.
And I'm sure that was a top seller for you guys back then when that game came out. Of course, with partnering with Disney, you guys did The Lion King as well. You also had a Beauty and the Beast game that came out. But, man, Tom, I don't even know where to begin, man. There's so much that you've had a hand in the, 80s, 90s. So I got to ask you, you mostly got into marketing, and I got to know why toys? Why the toy industry? How did you come into getting into the toy industry? Can you share with us, like, how did you come about that?
Yeah, I was living in New York City at the time, and I was working for this subsidiary of J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency that developed new products, and they were the group that helped develop Flintstones vitamins. And so that was a big hit, obviously. And I got a call from a headhunter that I want to go over to the New York Toy Fair. I didn't know what the heck she was talking about. But I said, sure, I'll go to the New York Toy Fair. And so I went over to the New York Toy Fair, and she introduced me to a vice president at Mattel. And so I started a conversation with this guy, Joe Whitaker, who was a VP at Mattel. And we hit it off pretty well. We just had a conversation at the time. And that was kind of it. But I was intrigued by, walking around and seeing all the toys. It was really fascinating to see all this stuff and how they presented it. They had professional actors and actresses presenting the toys to retail buyers. There was no internet, of course. It was all retail buyers. So it was very interesting. And then nothing for months. And in the interim, I actually got called in front of a Senate subcommittee hearing on children's advertising, because they were mad at Kellogg's, and they were mad for children's advertising, and they're mad at Mars for candy advertising, and somehow I got called into that too for Flintstones. And, if you go to a Senate subcommittee hearing, it's pretty bad. And and of course Mattel was there too, and Mattel was there, Hasbro was there, Ideal was there. The senators sit up high on these mahogany desks, and you're down low below them. You're looking up at them like that. And you're on a mahogany.
Right.
On a very hard table and an iron folding chair with a lawyer next to you.
Oh boy.
And Senator Margaret Chase Smith looks at me and says, "So, Mr. Kalinske, you think selling drugs to children is a good idea?"
Oh my God.
And I said, "Senator, I'm sure you're aware that Flintstones vitamins is a nutritional product. It is not a drug.
Right.
It contains all the vitamins and minerals that children need. And there's so many moms that are happy that we're doing this, because even though they want their children to eat fruits and vegetables, it's very hard for them to get them to eat fruits and vegetables. So if they give them a Flintstones vitamin, they know they're doing something for their health." Let me read a letter from a mom who basically said that. So I read this letter, I pulled out. And And then I said, "Senator, would you like me to read some more letters too? I have about 5,000 here." And I pulled this big mailbag full of letters.
That's awesome.
That was one of my favorite stories of the documentary Console Wars. I love that.
I love that story.
I saw that on there too. And I said, "Oh, I got 500 or 5,000 more letters. You want me to or ma'am?" And that was it,
The
So
Mattel guys were now behind me. Different group of Mattel guys, but they said after the inquiry, out in the hallway. They said, you know, that was pretty good. Well, why don't you come out to Mattel in Hawthorne, California sometime, and we'll get you an interview out there. And so that got set up, and I went out to Mattel, and that's how I ended up in the toy industry.
Oh man. Who'd have thought that a Senate hearing would lead you to working with one of, if not at the time, the biggest toy company?
Yeah, it was.
Right there. Then, I mean, that's so amazing, Tom. You know, I've kind of followed you over the years. You know, I'm huge into retro gaming. You know, and you've always to me been like that voice of gaming back then. You know, especially 80s. And then from the early to mid 90s with Sega and everything like that. But before we get into the video games, I do want to still get into and talk with you about your time as in the toy industry. Yeah. So when you got into Mattel, what was the situation like there? What was it that they were hoping to achieve with your time and tenure there at Mattel?
Well, I started at a low level. I was a product manager on preschool toys, and I started on CNCs and Jack in the Boxes and little wooden vehicles called putt-putts. And you know, I changed the packaging to red and white, and the business grew nicely. You know, it wasn't huge, but it was, you know, a $50 million business or something back in 1972. And one day, Ruth Handler, the founder, one of the founders, Mattel was founded by Ruth and Elliot Handler, and a guy named Matt, and that's where the Matt L is Elliot.
Oh, okay.
And, nice. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And Ruth came into my cubicle, and she was about 5'2" and a little fiery person. You know, she swore like a sailor, and you know, had a lot of character.
Yeah.
She says, "Tom, Barbie sales declined last year. The retail buyers say it's over for Barbie. My sales force says it's over for Barbie. The Wall Street analysts say it's over for Barbie. We should go do something else. What do you think about that?" And I said, "Ruth, that's the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Barbie will be around long after you and I are gone." She said, "That's what I wanted to hear. I'm going to talk to Ray, who was the president of the company, about you getting on the Barbie business." And so that's how I ended up on the Barbie business.
Oh my goodness.
And you know, and fortunately the business had fallen from like 100 million to 42 million, and we did a lot of things to bring it back up, and they worked. You know, we did a lot of different dolls. We did career dolls, we did low price dolls, we did high price dolls, we did deals with famous designers like Oscar de la Renta. We did more accessories like the Dream House and the camper and what have you, and the business grew and grew and grew, and it was just really good.
This is going to be a little bit of an interesting question here, Tom. You working a male working at the head of for Barbie, or you know, the advertising for Barbie, did you run into any kind of resistance for that? You know, being a guy working with the girls' type toy line, was that something that you ever thought? No, I wouldn't say thought, but did you have any kind of, you know, pushback on?
No, I didn't. And also remember, it's not just me. I had a team, and I had a team of actually it was mostly ladies that worked under me as marketing directors and product managers. A gal named Rita Fire, a gal named Judy Shackelford, and then the best hire I ever made in my life was a gal named Jill Barad. I hired her out of Revlon. And because the fashion, you know, cosmetics, it's a fashion business. You have to have something new every year. Toys, you have to have something new every year. So there's some similarity there. And she understood fashion. But she was just terrific. And, you know, I always tease her. I say I helped build the Barbie business from 42 million to 550. And she says, "Well, I took it from 550 to 2 billion. And I said, "Yeah, but my percent increases were bigger."
Right. You know, the only reason I asked that is because, you know, the late 70s and early 80s were a different time for toys. You know, now we're a little more on an even playing field. But back then, you know, there was definitely that hard line between boys' toys and girl toys. So I was just curious as to, you know, if there was some kind of resistance, or if there was some kind of, like, you know, a little bit of a raised eyebrow saying, "This guy working with Barbie toys, you know, what's going on here? Is he really going to make it work?" But I'm glad to hear, that it, you know, the team made it work and everything was amazing, because as we all know, Barbie was going to be here for the long haul. She's not going nowhere. You're absolutely right on that.
Yeah, it sure worked out.
So I'm also curious, I got to ask, because my wife wanted to know. My wife's a huge fan of She-Ra, and she also thanks you for making She-Ra and coming up with all that. Tell me what that was like. Can you tell us about the insight on how Masters of the Universe and all of that came about?
Yeah.
Well, sure. It can be a long story. I'll try to make it short.
No, yeah, absolutely.
so you know, Mattel didn't have a male action line at that time. We had Big Jim, who wasn't a very big seller, and And Hasbro had acquired Kenner, so they had Star Wars, they had GI Joe, and they were just huge in the male action figure business. And so we did all this research. When you started it with research in those days, you started with drawings. So we started with drawings of Spider-Man and Batman and all different themes of characters that you can imagine.
Yeah.
And we put them in front of boys and said, which do you like? Well, this very strong, muscular-looking guy ended up doing very well in that research versus Star Wars and versus Spider-Man and what have you.
Yeah.
So then we developed models of, we developed models of those characters, physical models. And again, we put them in front of boys. And again, this strange, muscular guy who had a story around him of being, he had the power when he raised his sword and said, I have the power.
Yeah.
And he fought against this enemy Skeletor in Castle Grayskull.
Yes.
That resonated with
kids.
kids.
Cast of friends, and Skeletor had his cast of enemy friends.
Yeah.
And it won in the research. So that gave us the courage to really introduce the toy line. So we introduced the toy line along with stories, and She-Ra, of course, was Adam's sister, He-Man's sister. And it was actually Jill Barat, who I mentioned a minute ago, who said, little girls are loving He-Man and Masters of the Universe.
Wow.
And we had a TV show that we did, of course, a year ago.
Oh, yeah.
And about 30% of the viewers were girls.
Oh,
so
wow.
Jill said, we ought to do a girls male or female action line, if you will, different than Barbie. And She-Ra became the lead of that band of good girls who were action figures as well. So that's how She-Ra actually came about. It had a lot to do with the fact that girls enjoyed the television show, and Jill was smart enough to say, "Hey, we ought to do a toy line around it."
That's cool.
That's fantastic, man. That's great. And I bet that was at the time that was a really empowering thing for girls too. Having a strong female character in an action figure form to go to, because back then it was all about Barbie and dressing up and all that stuff. And then that's amazing to me that 30% you said of the viewers were girls at the time. That's great. And to be able to give those girls at the time something, give them a strong female that's look, I'm a badass too. I can be just as badass as She-Ra, right? So I mean, or as He-Man. So I mean, to give them that's really, really awesome for you guys to come up with that. That's amazing. Once again, one more thing before we get into the gaming, because I know everybody watching want to know all about the video game industry. I got to ask you about your time at Matchbox. So you had left Mattel like in the late 80s, right?
Yeah, 87.
In 87. And then how did you come into it with Matchbox? And if you could tell us a little bit about how you kind of jump started the Hot Wheels industry then too.
Okay, so a friend of mine, a guy named David Ye, ran a big manufacturing company in Hong Kong, China. And he actually was a contract manufacturer for Mattel. He made a lot of stuff for us, both dolls and even Hot Wheels cars. And because he had a big die-cast factory in Macau. And nice. He bought, it could be a long story again, but anyway, Matchbox was in bankruptcy in England. It was in receivership, as they say.
Oh, wow.
And to buy it out of receivership in England, you had to agree to keep a factory open in England, and you had to agree to employ X number of people, and you had to invest X amount of money. So I was at Mattel at the time, and I said, geez, we can't keep a factory open in England, Right. And so we didn't buy Matchbox. Well, he bought Matchbox.
Oh, wow.
And he bought it for a very favorable price. So anyway, he calls me up and he says, okay, I know you're interested in this. Why don't you get out of that big company and come here to a smaller company and do something entrepreneurial, and we'll have a lot of fun together.
Yeah.
And I liked David, and I liked the idea of actually doing something more entrepreneurial at the time. I'd been with a big company for a long time. And so it's 15, 16 years. And so I did. And of course, then I got into Matchbox, and boy, was it a mess. I mean, it was just an awful mess. I could tell you story after story. I'll give you a couple. The head of Matchbox UK, his hobby was horse racing. So he, of course, spent the advertising budget in horse racing magazines. Well, that made a lot of sense for Matchbox diecast polish.
Yeah.
And then another guy there
Wow.
liked hot air ballooning. So he had this big hot air balloon that roamed around England that had a big Matchbox logo on it. Well, that didn't make any sense either. Anyway, so they're losing money in England. They're losing money in Germany and France and Italy. I mean, Europe was just a disaster.
Oh boy.
So I had to go around, and in those days, to reorganize companies in Germany and in France and in Italy, the laws are much different than they are here. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to fire senior managers, no matter how incompetent they are.
Right. Yeah.
So I had to work my way through all that, and eventually did. Well, one funny story is I ended up in Barcelona, Spain, for the Spanish company, and I got there. I don't know, a day early or something, and I didn't speak Spanish, but I had Matchbox logo cards, and so I showed this taxi driver the logo card for Matchbox, and he said, "Oh, Matchbox, yeah." Off we go, and we go to this building in the industrial area outside of Barcelona, and I go in, and there's this Matchbox sign, and I go in, and there's nobody there because it's nap time, it's siesta time, and, lunchtime, and I go through this door, and there's a factory. And there's die-cast machines and plastic injection molding machines and all this stuff. And there's packaging going on and what have you. So I called. There was a phone in the reception area, and I used my you have to use your credit card number and all that in those days. And I called David back in Hong Kong. And I said, David, I'm sitting in our factory in Barcelona, Spain. He says, we don't have a factory in Barcelona, Spain. I said, well,
oh no.
I'm watching them. Die-cast machines, injection molding machines, plastic stuff going in and out, and packaging with Matchbox logo on it. He says, Tom, it's an illegal operation.
Wow.
Get out of there.
Wow.
Wow.
And the fact that the taxi driver knew too, he's like, oh yeah, I know where that
funny? Yeah, he must have had a relative or something.
Funny.
So anyway, I went to the hotel, called the police, and it took a long time, but we got that straightened out eventually.
Oh, man.
Got it shut down.
That's incredible.
And, there were prosecutions and what have you, but that's just one. That's how bad things were at Matchbox back in those days.
See, I would never have imagined that. I would never in my wildest dreams imagine that.
But we eventually got everything straightened out, and I'll tell you again, it wasn't me. I hired really good young people, young guys, and primarily in England, that became superstars for all of Europe. And I took one of them from Europe to the United States to straighten out Matchbox US, a guy named John Barber, and he did. And later he went on to become president of Toys R Us. And so, it's all about the people you work with, and I was fortunate enough to be able to hire correctly and build team and have fun while I was doing it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's incredible. I can't believe
Yeah, I never in my wildest dreams. I remember being a kid and playing with Hot Wheels, and now to hear that, that puts a little bit of perspective on the whole.
And the rest of the story, of course, is that so I leave Matchbox to at a time when we were going to sell the thing, and we sold it to Tyco Industries.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of years later, Mattel bought Tyco Industries, and it went full circle without me being part of it at that point. But the Matchbox became a Mattel brand after all.
That's crazy. That's great. The universe just makes it work out that way sometimes,
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's like you said, you've always been fortunate in your career to make the right connections, and that's important of anybody in any careers is to make those connections, and you've made some very, very good connections in your lifetime. So you went from Matchbox, so now we're getting into Sega. We're getting into the 90s, and what a 90s, man. I'm a 90s kid. I know a lot of people can argue about what the best decade was. I got to say the 90s is the best decade for any kid to grow up in. There's just so many awesome things that came out for kids in the 90s, and we're going to get into video gaming. So, I got to ask you, how much experience did you have prior to coming into Sega with video games? Had you played video games before you moved into Sega or got to Sega? I know you have kids too. What was it like? What was your experience level with video games or the gaming industry prior going into Sega?
Okay, you probably forgot that Mattel owned Intellivision.
Oh, that's right. Yep, that's right. There it is. Yep.
And Intellivision was started by a couple guys that worked for me in what we called our activity toy and game division at the time. And they started Intellivision. And they started the handheld games first, the racing game, the football game.
Yep.
And those became big sellers. And the board of directors of Mattel said, this is an interesting business. And Atari, of course, was booming.
Oh, yeah.
So they said, let's separate the electronic game business away from the toy industry and start a separate division, separate company. Yeah. And so they formed Intellivision as a separate company, and it actually moved out of the building that the toy industry, the Mattel Toys, was in on 5150 Rosecrans. They moved him down the road a ways. And gosh, I keep dropping my phone. I'm sorry.
No, you're okay.
And so I was kind of angry about that, to tell you the truth, because I liked what my guys had done. I thought that it was going to be successful.
Yeah.
But they took it away from me. Anyway, and as the years passed, I would hear about how Atari was getting in trouble with too much inventory at retail, and Intellivision was getting in trouble with too much inventory at retail, and then Atari did the famous ET game disaster. And I would go into the board meetings at Mattel and say, hey, things aren't going to be so good for Intellivision. It's too much inventory at retail. And the CEO and chairman of Mattel would say, that's nice, pat me on the head and say, go back and play with your toys.
Man.
So I did not have a great feeling about it. And of course, then the whole thing collapsed. And when it collapsed, when Intellivision collapsed, it lost so much money that the banks were furious with Mattel, because we needed working capital to do our R&D and do our tooling and develop our toy lines.
Of course,
the banks would no longer finance us.
Yeah.
So I had to go hat in hand down to Wilshire Boulevard and meet with Drexel Burnham, the bank that is famous for doing subordinated debt, and basically begged them for financing. And Mike Milken refinanced Mattel. If he had not done that, we would have had to go Chapter 11. So you can imagine, I didn't have a great feeling about it.
Yeah.
I did enjoy playing video games, but I was kind of mad about the whole situation. So it took a while for me to get over that and to become more interested in the value of video games, which of course eventually occurred. And I think they're highly valuable and wonderful products, and great for imagination, and great for relaxing, and great for education, frankly. So I really, I had to do a 180-degree turn after my Intellivision experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, being a finance guy, I know that's got to be, myself being a finance guy, I know that's got to be tough when you have to go out there looking for financing. That's just, ooh. that must have been a tough time, definitely, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you so having dealt with the Intellivision and you saying that you're like the gaming industry, they had the big collapse and everything you mentioned, and then we got to mention them because it's part of your history. Along came Nintendo, of course. They sparked the they lit the country on fire essentially with the gaming industry. They took a big risk. Here, here in Japan, it's kind of funny watching the Console Wars documentary that you were a part of, which if you guys haven't seen this yet, you have got to go check it out. It's a fantastic documentary based on a book of the same name. For those who don't know, Nintendo, they were a card company at the time. They were making Hanafuda cards. And that's when they started. I mean, Nintendo's been around for a long time. Long before they even did anything with video games. So, I mean, they had to take a big risk. I'm sure people were looking at them like, are you guys crazy? You guys are making cards and you want to do video games? Like, did you see what just happened? So they had brought the NES over here to America after releasing the Famicom in Japan. And then Sega at the time, they had what was called the Mega Drive, which
well, first the Master System.
Well, the Master System, and it didn't do too well, right? It wasn't very good. And then they brought you along. They wanted to know, they needed some help, and you had some history in the toy industry, helping these companies grow from millions to billions of dollars and being successful. I know you said that you were a little iffy about the gaming industry. I'm sure that was still the case when Sega approached you about wanting to jump over to them, right?
Yeah, and actually, I was familiar with the 8-bit Master System because when I was running Matchbox,
Mhm.
Hayao Nakayama actually asked me to handle the distribution of it for
Oh
the
wow.
US and Europe. And I took a look at it and I compared it to NES and I said, well, it's not any different. And so I didn't see enough
Yeah.
of a difference or advantage to do that. So I turned him down. Now, I had known him from the past when he was at one point, remember, Sega was owned by Paramount Pictures, and Paramount
Mm.
Pictures was doing a lot with Mattel back in the 80s with
Right.
licenses. And so he would show up in town every now and then and I would get to meet him.
Hmm.
He was a vice president at the time of marketing of Sega. So
Hmm.
I knew him for years and years and years, but I turned him down on the 8-bit system. And then when I left Matchbox, as we were in the process of selling it
Mhm.
to Tyco, I
Mhm.
went on vacation and I'm in Hawaii and Nakayama shows up
Yeah.
and lures me to Japan to look
Hmm.
at 16-bit technology. He said,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
didn't like 8-bit, but I got something you're going to love.
Hmm.
And also to show me the handheld color Game Gear system,
Yeah.
portable system. And he was right. I fell in love with both of them because they were really different. I mean, Genesis Mega Drive was really different than what
Yeah.
Nintendo had at the time. And of course, Game Gear was way different than Game
Mhm.
Boy. So I really fell in love with the technology. And I thought some of the games were pretty good as well, which is helpful.
Yeah.
So that was how he lured me into Sega.
Yeah, the visuals to that story is so amazing on the Console Wars documentary.
Oh man, yeah.
I thought that was so cool. I loved how they added that animation to it. You know, you see Tom lying on the beach, and here he goes, businessman looking over, saying, "Hey, you want to come join Sega?" it, made, it made me wonder. Hey, is that really how it went down? Did he go look for you at the beach? Is
He
that
just
really what
found you on the beach.
happened? Yeah. I know you
so
were on vacation, but that was so cool.
so
Yeah.
you're coming into Sega, and they're trying to do this crazy thing and compete with Nintendo. And and which I mean, I guess you could safely kind of say that Nintendo had a little bit of a monopoly
Oh yeah.
on the video game industry at the
Yes.
time.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, I had one. I think we all had one when we were kids that grew up at that time. That was the NES was my first console, followed up by the Sega Genesis. And let's talk
Mhm.
about that now. So we got the Sega Genesis. We got this higher bit console that
16-bit.
is a 16-bit console that's trying to blow out the NES and wants to be more powerful. What was that like with you? And what was your first impressions? You said that you loved it when you first saw it. Um, were you one of the first people to actually get the chance to see what the actual design of the console had looked like before they showed it
Released.
off to the
No,
public?
no, it had actually been launched already.
Oh, that's
It
right. Yeah,
it just wasn't doing real well yet
yeah,
in the launch markets in the U.S.
yeah.
And so when I joined, I made a deal with Nakayama-san. I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I've got to be able to make all the decisions for the U.S. and the
Yeah,
Western world. And
yeah.
he agreed. And when I came into the office here in Northern California, it was in South
Mhm.
San Francisco at the time. There were a couple people I knew. I knew Al Nielsen. He had worked at Mattel. I
Mhm.
knew Paul Rio. He had worked at Mattel.
Yeah.
And then there was this guy Shinobu Toyota who I got to know very, very well. It became
Mhm.
my right arm.
Yeah.
Um, but it was kind of depressing to tell you the truth. I mean, because they weren't getting very far with the launch of Genesis,
Yeah.
and the retailers didn't like them, and the third parties wouldn't support the system, and everything was
Yeah.
kind of a mess. It was really kind of a depressing place, to tell you the truth.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so we had to change that. We had to change the attitude. We had to change the feeling that people had. We had to make them believe they could be successful. And yeah, I mean, it actually was depressing for me because one of the first things that I did was I toured the United States retailers. So I visited Toys R Us, and they told me
Oh,
how bad
wow.
Genesis was doing, and how they never lived up to their promises. And I went to Walmart, and they told me they weren't going to carry
You
it.
were gonna
And I
carry
went to
it. Yeah.
Target, and they said, well, we're carrying it, but we probably will drop it because it's not doing very well, and your
Oh
company
man.
doesn't do what it's supposed to. And so it was really, really a downer, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
So I actually went back to Japan, and I think this story is related in Console Wars pretty well.
Mhm.
And I said, hey, I've got a 5-point plan. We got to change things dramatically in the United States, and
Mhm.
we got to lower the price of the hardware. It's too expensive. We've got to take Altered Beast out of the hardware as the pack-in title, because in Oklahoma and Kansas they think that's devil worship.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the time, Sonic was under development, so I did know about it. And I did see it. And I did know that it looked very, very good.
Oh yeah.
And we're going to put our best title in with the hardware, and we're going to take on Nintendo in advertising. We're going to leave them the kiddie market. Anybody 13 and under, go play Nintendo. But if you're a teenager or a college age person or older, you want to play Genesis.
That's right.
Here's why. And so, and also we got to do more product development in the United States. We've got to do more sports titles. We did, of course, a lot of them then. Joe Montana football and Tommy Lasorda baseball and David Robinson basketball and on and on and on. And we've got to get the third parties on board. We've got to make it enticing to them to get on board. And so the first deal we did was with EA, who really saved us, by the way. I mean, they let us use, frankly, the engine for Joe Montana that became Joe Montana football. It was really the Madden engine. And we made a favorable deal with Trip and Larry Probst, where they got really a good deal on the licensing royalty that they had to pay. So that got EA on board. Once we got EA on board, then other third parties became interested in us, because frankly, in this business, you can't be successful with just your own titles. You have to have third party support.
Oh, and absolutely.
So we did those deals with EA and Tengen, Activision, and I'm forgetting a number of them. But anyway, it all worked out.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I mean, you guys, I remember, man, you guys were so edgy too back then. Like, you guys really pushed the envelope with the marketing, which I know came from you, man. That was great. Like, you guys did I remember what was it? The Genesis does what Nintendo don't. I love that. That was, you guys, that was fantastic.
One of my favorite commercials, I don't know if you remember, there are two favorites that I have. We had this real nerdy looking guy, looked kind of like Bill Gates, and he was we're talking about how cool it was to play Genesis, and all of a sudden he converts from this nerdy looking guy to this really cool out there guy playing Genesis.
Yeah, he's like in his backyard or something, right? Yeah, I know that one.
And then the other one was we had the Super NES on the back of an old milk truck that was belching smoke, and we had the Genesis on the back of a Ferrari. And it took off, and we talked about how
I remember that one.
If you want speed, you better be with Genesis, because Super Nintendo doesn't have speed.
Right? Yeah.
So
that's what works, man. That's what kids were looking for.
Man, I used to get all these nasty letters from Howard Lincoln at Nintendo threatening to sue me.
Howard Lincoln, now that's a guy, huh?
Yeah,
that's the guy, man. That was the guy. You guys definitely, man, didn't waste any time once you started taking over, and they let you because you said, look, you gotta let me do stuff. You gotta let me run this show. You gotta let me bring you guys back, and you did an excellent job of that. They went from I believe I'm seeing here, a $72 million to more than over $1.5 billion market value because of you. Right. And I mean, you guys really the battle lines were drawn. You didn't waste no time. Like like we're here, and then you guys had Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yes.
Oh man. By far and away, and even still today, a very prominent, iconic video game character. Tell me about your involvement with Sonic, man. What was that like? What was it like when you saw Sonic for the first time? And when you saw him, were you just like, okay, this is it. This is who's going to represent.
That's our guy.
Sega. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have many choices. We had Alex the Kid and Shinobi. So actually, when I first saw Sonic, it was in what we would call wire form, and I could see how fast he was going to be able to move on the screen.
Yeah.
And then when we got the color drawings of him, the team really, Al Nielsen and Madeline Schroeder, Canepa, they, it said, interesting looking guy. He had big fangs. He was very ferocious.
Yeah.
And he had a girlfriend, Madonna, who had a rock band, and she was very busty.
Yeah.
And Madeline didn't think that was such a great idea. So we had to convince Japan to make a number of changes. And a lot of it was softening the character, but still keeping him with that personality of kind of the smart-ass teenager next door, who gets in trouble but ends up doing the right thing. And so that was kind of what we did. I mean, give him a nice personality and get rid of the ferociousness. And it took a while to convince Japan to do that. And actually, Nakayama was the one who was the final. He said, "Do what they're saying in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it did work out. It was the right thing to do. But again, like many video games, the stories are really important, and they wrote great stories for Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah.
And the stories were prevalent in the game, of course, but they also translated to comic books. And then eventually, we did the same thing we had done with He-Man and Masters. We did television show. We actually did two television shows. We did a network show and a syndicated every afternoon after school show. So we had two television shows going at the same time, and that certainly helped the business as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys. I remember watching that TV show. It's so crazy because I was telling my wife the other day. I said, "Hey, did you know that the voice of Sonic the Hedgehog was Jalil White?
That's right.
Guy who played Urkel in Family Matters
himself.
Yeah. Like, what? I was like, yeah, like that's a fun little fact that not a lot of people know, but yeah, that's really cool. And yeah, man, Sonic the Hedgehog, man, he defines the attitude of Sega. Trying to soften him down. I've seen those sketches you're referring to where he looked ferocious and scary and all this stuff. And the pictures of Madonna, you can see all that in the Console Wars documentary too, which is great.
The band, he had a band, right?
Yeah, he had a band too. And but Sonic really did help drive the success of the Genesis.
Yes.
And you guys ended up doing another edition of the Sega. I believe they had updated the console to include Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I remember that. In which I believe that was the version of the console that I got as a kid.
That was my favorite Sonic game, by the way. Sonic 2.
Yeah.
Sonic 2.
Yeah, that's my favorite. That's absolutely hands down my favorite Sonic game is the second one. So you guys, that was really like there had really never been a defined. Yeah, there he is. There we go. That's the man right there. Oh, nice. That was when everybody thinks of console wars, man, it's Sega Nintendo. That was really the console wars. I know right now people are it's Sony and Microsoft right now is and I wanted to ask you back then you guys really didn't play nice with each other.
That's to say
Nintendo and Sega, they weren't really very friendly to one another, so much so back in those times. Is it weird to you to see guys like Phil Spencer trying to cross those lines and try to play because you see the relationship with Nintendo and Microsoft, for instance, and they work together on a lot of things, and then you got Sony, who's kind of like what is it like having been in the thick of those console wars in the 90s compared to what it's like right now, where you have Phil Spencer is trying to work with like Nintendo and he wants everybody to play nice and things. That would be insanely unheard of back then, right? Like
it is. And I'll tell you the one that really shocks me is to see Sega working with Nintendo. I mean, Sonic and Mario together in a game.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Mario Sonic Olympics. Yeah.
And they had that racing game. I was actually at E3 the year when that came out.
Yeah.
And I got to play it in the Nintendo booth. And I played Sonic against somebody else playing Mario, and I beat him, which made me very, very happy. So I haven't touched the Nintendo controller in years. But anyway, it is. It's very different now.
Yeah.
Now, we had the battle with Nintendo, but we were very friendly initially with Sony. Remember, Sony wasn't in the video game business.
Oh yeah.
And Sony, Olaf Olafsson wanted to get into the video game business. He was the president of Sony Electronics, and so he said, "Help us do software." And so they opened this studio in Santa Monica, and we would lend engineers to go down there to help them develop software that would be playable on Genesis and then later on the Sega CD. And so we had a very close relationship with Sony in those days, and we were very helpful to one another. Now, the story where that goes, of course, is Olaf and I wanted to do the single platform because everybody loses money on hardware. So let's just combine. Let's do one Sony Sega platform as the next platform, or Sega Sony or Sony Sega. Doesn't matter what it's called.
Yeah.
and we'll share the loss on the hardware. And whoever does the best software will have that revenue and that profit in their company. Well, we were much better at software development than they were. So I thought this is a no-brainer for
No
guys.
kidding. Yeah.
And Olaf and I went to Japan and we talked to IDA, the president of Sony, and he agreed. He thought this was a good idea. Go over to Nakayama at Sega, and Nakayama said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to help Sony. Yeah. And so he turned that down. And to me, that was the worst business decision that could possibly have been made.
Yeah.
And I kind of blame myself. I must not have been persuasive enough. I must not have been a good enough salesperson of this idea. But anyway, we didn't do it, and the rest is history, of course.
Yeah.
They went on and did their own Sony PlayStation.
Yeah.
They hired a bunch of people away from me.
Yeah, that was crazy because it makes you wonder what could have been, because that would have been a mega deal, especially when you fast forward 20 years and you're looking at Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. They're going at it now, and we don't hear Sega anymore. They're not there.
No,
so it's like
a little bit of software. That's about it.
And that's about it. So it's just like what could have been. I when I saw the documentary and I saw it, the first thing I said was, "What? You don't want to do this? What?" Yeah. That was just because like Tom says, it seemed like a win-win, no-brainer situation. Even a common person looking at it from the outside, like, that sounds like a great idea.
I'm curious, Tom. Did Sony try to work with you guys first before they went to Nintendo? Because they did try to go to Nintendo too. They were going to do a Nintendo PlayStation. Was that before? Did they come to Sega first before they went to Nintendo?
No, I think they went to Nintendo first.
Okay,
I think they did.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, because I often wondered about that, especially when I saw that in the documentary. And then of course they brought out the Sega Saturn. Which, oh man, that was, and I'm sure they wanted to release it early, right? And you were like, let's not.
They did release it too early.
They did release it
was
too
a little rushed. Yeah, I think that was a little
rushed.
bit rushed.
Yeah,
but I do remember getting one of those as well, thinking, I think Echo was the game that came out with that, correct? One of the first ones, Echo the Dolphin.
Panzer Dragoon.
Panzer Dragoon.
Yeah. But anyway.
Man,
that was another mistake, and that was sort of toward the end of my time at Sega, and it was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. I got turned down on the Sony Sega deal. I got turned down on a chipset from Silicon Graphics that became the N64.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I wasn't getting cooperation from Japan, and then I was forced to introduce the Saturn early. There wasn't enough hardware to introduce it, and there certainly wasn't enough software to introduce it. And so that whole thing was a disaster. And, when you're not able to make the decisions and somebody's making them for you at 5,000 miles away and they don't understand the situation, it's not good.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah, that's
time while I was there up until the very end.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean that's that's just kind of goes to show it can be kind of hard to work with someone when they're, like you said, 1,000 miles overseas. Because the Japanese landscape and culture is far different from here in America. And you did the absolute best job that you were able to with what you had to do that here.
Yes.
I got to ask you something. I know a lot of people would love to see Sega come back and do another console. Do you feel that is, how would you feel if they just were like, look, we're going to try to get, obviously they're more of a software company. You got Sonic everywhere now. You got Sonic on your phone. You got Sonic on Nintendo, which is like you said, very weird,
right? Yeah.
It's so insane to see that. How would you feel if they just were like, you know what, we're gonna try this one more time and do this again? And how would you feel if they did something like that?
Well, again, if they had enough of an advancement in technology to make a big difference between what exists today, then I still think somebody could be successful with it. I keep looking at the stuff that's going on in VR and thinking someday somebody's going to really hit this out of the ballpark. They're going to do such a spectacular game that everybody's going to have it. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but I think it will happen eventually.
Yeah, it's so, the innovation is just, Brian and I, we talk about this all the time, that competition breeds innovation. It breeds, new ideas and advancements. And I thought it was great during the time that you were at Sega that you guys would push each other to create the next thing. You guys ended up with a 64 and the Sega Saturn and beyond. And now here we are, PlayStation 5 is looking at the most awesomest graphics, whatever the case may be. The VR is looking better, not quite there yet, but it's looking better. So now we're looking at another set of advancements where this competition continues to come in. Is this something that you would want to, let's just say Sega decides to do in a console, would you want to take that on and say, hey, I'm the guy, let's push back, let's do this? That's something that you would be interested in, or your video game days are over?
I'll tell you, my team would love me to, but I don't know if I could. I'm 76 years old, for crying out loud. I'm not exactly up for it right now. I don't think.
Yeah.
But I do think the other thing that people miss out on a lot is, aside from a lot of really good games. You mentioned Echo the Dolphin, by the way. That's a work of art. That's a wonderful game.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it is.
Aside from the games and the marketing, Sega did so many other things back in those days. I mean, think about it. We really were the start. We were the impetus to form a new industry association. Then the IDSA, now they've changed the name. We did the rating system before anybody else, and it became the rating system, the ERB of the industry eventually, over a lot of opposition initially. We really did the first private video game show, what turned into E3 that everybody for a long time loved. Now I guess it's going the other direction, because who needs to get together in a big convention hall any longer? We did the first Street Date. We had more women in management than any nobody in the video game industry had women in management. We had lots of women in management back in those days. We had the on university campus representatives, going around dorm to dorm playing video games, and as a way of underground marketing. We did the shopping mall tours where we compared. We had Super NES there and Genesis there, and said, okay, play both of them. Which one do you like better?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Genesis. So a lot of stuff we did. The cable TV system that we did showed that you could do, do games over a cable system, if you will, back in those days. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't want to go on and on about that, but a lot of stuff was
I mean, you guys, took a lot of risks that Nintendo was not wanting to take a risk with. I mean, like you had said, you wanted to market the Genesis more for those 13 and older kids, teenagers, the more edgy console of the two, obviously. I remember one thing that when I was a kid, and I've talked to, I'm actually good buddies with Daniel Pacina, who helped out with Mortal Kombat. And we've talked, and I'm like, man, playing Mortal Kombat on a Genesis was far superior than playing on a Super Nintendo. I mean, green blood. I mean, you even said that green blood. Like, what was green blood?
I think that decision to show the blood on the Genesis side, to leave it as is, the original game, I think that was the hard line that really separated Sega from Nintendo. Because I think that was the one that says, okay, here we go. This is where Sega stands, and this is where Nintendo stands. Yeah,
and even Howard Lincoln admitted afterward that he was shocked that worked to our advantage. He thought it was going to work to their advantage because they were the good guys and didn't have red blood. They had green blood.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I mean, you guys, and the thing that separates that era of gaming from the current era of gaming, in my opinion, I've said this time and again to many people I talk with, right now it's so much more about graphics and making things look good or look better. Back then, I mean, you guys did the 32X at one point. You guys had the Sega CD, which was great. I mean, having this thing that connects into the Genesis that plays CD-based games, that was just unheard of. It was more, the innovation seems like it was so far different from how it is now. Now it's about graphics. Back then it was about what can we do, or what can we, I mean, I remember back then, I remember back in the day, there was I don't know, Tom, you probably remember this. There was this vest you could wear, and if you got hit in Mortal Kombat, and it would hit you in the chest. I mean, all kinds of crazy.
That wasn't called the Activator. That wasn't.
I think that's what that might have been. But it was all this insane technology back then. You just don't see. You don't see that anymore. And I kind of miss that. That just, what can we do? What can we get in the hands of these gamers to really change and innovate the industry.
Yeah.
And you guys, man, you guys paved the way back then for all that stuff, you know?
Well, some of it worked and some of it didn't. I still
Yeah.
say that the Sega CD, while it wasn't a huge seller, it was necessary because none of us knew how to program on an optical disc. I mean, it was all a whole new thing. How do you put filmed movie footage with animation footage with orchestration music, and how do you get all that together and make it work in a game? And so that was a learning experience that was absolutely necessary to do. And of course, back on VR, one that didn't work, we did an early VR, and
oh boy,
everybody got sick, including me. You'd put this on and you'd be in this VR world, and it was talk about motion sickness, holy mackerel. You'd either throw up or you'd fall over, one of the two. That was technology that was well ahead of its time. And I know they figured it out since, but or Sega hasn't, but other people have figured it
out. Yeah, right. No kidding, man.
But yeah, that's the stuff that I'm talking about. The innovation that happened during that time paved the way for so much. The Oculus now, you know, and all this other VR stuff that's going on. It's not perfect. It's not quite there yet, but that started with, you know, back in the day with Sega. I remember seeing that in a documentary, like this visor type thing, and you look up and you look to the side and you had all these, I think they were like tanks. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what game that was, but that was ahead of its time. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was.
Absolutely.
They didn't get it solved back then because it could have been, wow, imagine that, you know.
Oh man.
No, that documentary is so insightful, and you know, there was a clip of you, Tom, speaking about online gaming is going to be huge, you know, and I'm telling myself, the internet is so young. It wasn't even a thing yet, and AOL was still, you know, the leading provider of internet service.
Yeah,
and you already foresaw how big online gaming was going to be. Talk about being ahead of your time, man.
Yeah, I actually
what could have been done.
One of the things we did was I play against the president of AT&T, and he was in New Jersey and I was here in Northern California. And we did a racing car game against one another over telephone lines.
Wow.
Man, that isn't.
There was a bit of latency in the game.
Oh yeah,
just a little bit.
Just a little bit. High ping rate there for sure, huh?
Well, before we wrap up this episode, Tom, I got to know, what are you up to now? Like, what are you doing right now in your career?
Oh, all right.
What are you getting into right now?
Yeah, I've had to slow down a lot because of, you know, different issues. But I am chairman of a 3D printing company, and guess where the biggest market right now is for 3D printing? Video game structures that you guys and players create in the game. Yep. You create a soldier or whatever, you create his armament, you create his outfit, and you want to have a physical version of it on your desk.
Yeah.
So we have software, it's called Mixed Dimensions is the name of the company. So Mixed Dimensions, you click on the character and we will 3D print it for you in very high quality resin, very full color, different sizes, different prices, and ship it to you. So the market right now, even though we could use this technology in many different ways, right now the market is video games. The Star Trek players, for example, they like to decorate their spacecraft, their constellation the way they want it. And then you click on it and we print it and ship it to you. A lot of Eve games, we do the same thing with some of the Eve games, lots of the fighting characters and what have you. So that's something that I'm doing. It's a startup, obviously. It's funded by venture capital here in Silicon Valley. And then other than that, I'm on a couple of education technology companies. You know, I fell in love with education technology actually when I was at Sega, when we did the Pico system.
Yep.
And I saw that video game technology can make curriculum more fun and interesting than anything else. So why don't we do that in schools, whether it's K-12 schools or colleges or corporate training or what have you? Let's make the curriculum or the content more fun and interesting. So I'm involved in a couple companies doing that. And that's about it.
Still making a difference is what I hear.
I'll share a quick story with you. This has to do with Sega. I remember when I was a kid, Sega Channel. That was such a crazy
idea.
I did. I mean, who would have thought playing video games through your cable company? That's just insane. And I remember when I found out about that, my mom was like, "Okay, I'm gonna get it for you." And I remember waiting outside my porch the day the cable man was gonna come and bring me video games. That was such an insane thing to talk about. I waited on my porch probably about 5 hours that day, and he finally came. And it was like Christmas, and the cable guy was Santa, and he came in with that cartridge. And I've seen that not too long ago. There was some store that had one for sale, and that was just, I mean, you guys, I'm telling you, you guys had so many amazing and just off the wall. Like, who would have thought playing video games through your cable company?
Well, no, not so much off the
thing.
wall, man. That stuff to this day, you know.
So, quick story on that.
Ahead of its time.
You know, we did the cable channel with Time Warner and also TCI, the two biggest cable providers in the U.S. at the time. And so my head of R&D was a great guy, Joe Miller, and I didn't know this. I thought that every cable box was basically the same technology around the United States. No, they're all different, city by city by city. So Joe asked me to come over to the R&D floor, come down to the R&D floor. I go into this huge room, and there's all these cable boxes sitting around the room, hundreds of them. He says, "You see what you're making me do?
Oh, man.
I gotta figure out how to make games work on every one of these things. They're all different."
But hey, you guys made it work, and it was great, and it was so crazy just being able to turn on my Sega Genesis, and it was kind of like I'll tell you this, it was like an early version of Game Pass.
Yeah.
You guys were like the first Game Pass. You guys started the whole thing. Pay a monthly subscription fee. You get all these games. I remember playing games like Vector Man, one of my favorite Genesis games. Vector Man, playing that. You guys had Comic Zone, another one of my classic favorite Genesis games, and playing those first, because you guys did like early access stuff too on there. Like play a couple levels of Vector Man on here. I mean, that was Game Pass before it was Game Pass, right there. You know, that's just crazy to think about that kind of stuff. And once again, thank you, Tom, for these awesome ideas and coming up with this stuff that we all got to enjoy, that grew up in that time as kids and teenagers to do that. And and thank you for being on the show today. And we appreciate you taking the time.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to be on our show, and thank you guys for taking time to watch as well. I'll put a link in the description below of where you guys can go and check out and check out the book. The book is great.
Oh yeah.
It definitely does I feel like, in my opinion, a much more deep dive into a lot of things we didn't even talk about here on this show. And definitely go check out the Console Wars documentary. You guys can watch it on CBS All Access. If you have Amazon Prime, you can do that. But Tom, once again, thank you for being on this episode of Dragoncast with us. We definitely appreciate you. And until next time, we'll see you guys. Take it easy.
Thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.